Great. Thank you so much for having me and inviting me. Thank you particularly to Erin for putting up with my communication while I was on holiday in remote parts of Ireland last week, but I made it. Today, in 15 minutes, I am going to talk about two initiatives to advance safer chemicals in the marketplace. One is the SIN list, the Substitute It Now list, created by the International Chemical Secretariat, what we like to call our sister organization based out in Sweden, and the GreenScreen for safer chemicals, and one case study about how it's being used. Who we are Clean Production Action is a small NGO based in Somerville, Massachusetts. I live in Toronto, Canada. My colleague Lauren Hine, who directs the GreenScreen program, actually lives in Juneau, Alaska. So we have massive time zone differentiation when we have our staff calls. But we are a small nonprofit that designs and develops strategic solutions to promote green chemistry, safer products, and environmental and sustainable materials. But I think our strength is our networks. We network with many, many networks internationally, and we particularly focus on governments, NGOs, and industry leaders so that we have this great, rich exchange of how we move the economy forward with safer materials. The first one I'd like to go into is the SIN list developed by ChemSec. ChemSec is a nonprofit based in Gothenburg, Sweden. They have been following the REACH negotiations closely over the many years in which REACH was developed, and they, together with about 9 other NGOs in Europe, developed something called the Substitute It Now list. And the rationale for developing the list is to, I don't know if you can see this too well, is to fast track the most urgent high concern chemicals for substitution. The goal of the SIN list, again, to fast track, particularly to clarify the criteria of substances of very high concern, which was established within REACH. REACH, as you know, came into enforcement in June 2007. The first SIN list was created in 2008 and has since grown into version 2.1 just this year. The goal of ChemSec with the SIN list who also has a business group, the ChemSec business group, is to just simply make it easier for businesses to better understand what will or might be coming down the pike regarding the candidate list for authorization. And so in the publications, if you go onto their website, you'll see quotes like the need for speed. The first chemicals for authorization will come next year to 2014. There has been an ongoing process to list chemicals on the candidate list. And what the initiative of the SIN list is simply to create this list quicker. It's a voluntary list, but it is based on peer-reviewed, publicly available data. And so currently you will find about 626 chemicals listed on the SIN list, which all meet the criteria of REACH authorization, being CMRs, PBTs, very persistent, very bioaccumulative, and substances of equivalent concern. This is a very interesting database. You'll have great fun going on this database. It's clear, it's easy to negotiate, and it gives you tons of information. I don't have time to show you, but I do want to point out that the SIN list database, you can go into, for instance, you can screen by health and environmental classification, just carcinogens, just reprotox, EDCs, substances of equivalent concern, possible uses, has a whole range of sectors and uses. The EU substances of very high concern list, which is the candidate lists, when it appeared on the SIN list. Production volume, interesting here. You can screen based on 1 to 10 tons per year or up to 1,000 tons a year. And registration information. Has it been registered? Is it registered as an intermediate? Is it not yet registered? When you do your screens and you press show or list your display options and outcomes, a great wealth of information where you can do an even deeper dive. So depending on the chemical that comes up, You would click on there for more information and find production tonnage, names of producers, locations of where it is being produced, end uses, functional needs or functional aspects of the chemical. So again, it's a great, great tool. Interestingly enough, what is the impact of the SIN list? This is just a few examples. Again, go on to the sinlist.org website, or ChemSec website for more information. I just picked up a few here, just noticing a few. Carrefour, Europe's largest retailer, has added SIN to their own restricted substances list of 600 substances of very high concern, which, as they say, we send to suppliers so that they can begin their work on substitution. Sara Lee's critical ingredients program integrates the SIN list, and Skanska, which is a member of ChemSec's business group, one of the largest construction firms in the world, has integrated SIN into their own voluntary restricted substances list. Found it interesting that investors are using the SIN list. Again, on the website, you can get a presentation and video for more information from MSCI, former Risk Metrics, who are using the SIN list to try to assess the business risk that companies might be facing in future as REACH unrolls and chemicals for authorization are listed. Questions they will ask is, who will be impacted? When will they be impacted? What is the economic impact this will have? So they're using the SIN list to identify the most, as they call, at-risk chemicals, and therefore identify the most, as they say, at-risk companies. This is a quote from one of their presentations about they use SIN to identify product categories that could be impacted by REACH's substance restrictions and map these product categories to companies' revenues. And you'll see some metrics on their presentations on the website where they're incorporating some of this into their risk metrics on company, how many possible SIN list chemicals are used in those companies' portfolios, who is at higher risk, who is at lower risk. I also found this interesting that the U.S. Department of Defense is using the SIN list, as they say, to identify and proactively manage emerging contaminants that can adversely impact human health and the environment, as well as military mission, and to look at how the DoD, the impacts of REACH on military readiness, and in addition, using the SIN list as a leading indicator of potential substitutions in commercial off-the-shelf products. For a full range of who uses SIN list, go to their website. You'll see more information there. I'm moving on so I can keep in time. Now to the GreenScreen, Advancing Informed Substitution. This is a method for comparative chemical hazard assessment developed in-house by us, by Dr. Lauren Hine and Dr. Mark Rossi, and it builds on the US EPA Design for Environment approach, and we've made sure it's freely and publicly accessible. You can download all the method for free from our website. You do a GreenScreen by first assessing and classifying hazards, applying the benchmarks, and then making informed decisions. 3 steps, very simple. Not. First one, it does cover 18 hazard endpoints. You'll see the range of things that were, oh dear, sorry. Phew, wrong one. Human health category groups 1 and 2, we made sure that we included aspects that are important for worker health and safety, and then, of course, the usual environmental toxicity and fate. And then the more time-consuming is the applying the benchmarks. This is a very dense slide, but it gives you a sense of how you would then take each CAS number, apply it next to criteria, to then see if the chemical and or its breakdown products are inherent in the GreenScreen. Do they meet this criteria? If they don't, you move up and see if it will meet criteria 2, benchmark 2. If not, and its benchmark degradation products can pass these criteria, you then assess it against benchmark 3 and up. And you'll see this one here, avoid chemical of high concern, meets the authorization criteria for under REACH, as well as other regulatory drivers. And here, use but search for safer substitutes. On a hazard comparison, it is safer, not safe, safer in comparison. And your idea is that you're seeking continuous improvement. It's the opportunity for improvement and then up to benchmark 4. We also added benchmark U, which is undetermined due to insufficient data. If a chemical has too many data gaps, you just can't benchmark it, unless, of course, it dings as an IARC1 or whatever. If it's a carcinogen, it hits benchmark 1. The value of the chemicals benchmark score, and this is what makes it different to the DFE hazard assessment, it is this benchmarking use of the GreenScreen that companies find useful because you are categorizing chemicals in this kind of continuous improvement. Now I want to talk a little bit about HP. These are HP's slides, how they use the GreenScreen. Why? Because replacing materials is very expensive. You don't want to invest in a multi-million-dollar new material and find 2 years later it's going to be restricted in regulation or whatever. So it makes good economic sense to reduce your business risk, understand what is inherently safer. Plus, they want to avoid unintended consequences and identify preferable materials. They use the GreenScreen to choose alternatives to substances of control. Again, those that hopefully won't be restricted in future. But they also find that by articulating material goals to their suppliers, it really spurs innovation. You're not just telling suppliers what they don't want, you're pointing to what they do want. So what they've done, for instance, in HP's goals to phase out all halogenated flame retardants and polymers, they have integrated GreenScreen into their procurement and specifications to their supply chain. In the case of their paracords, the suppliers have to meet GreenScreen benchmark 2 or higher to hit the approved material list. They've now screened well over 30 materials. Several have been approved. The screening is mandatory in addition to all standard and regulatory requirements, full disclosure under confidential disclosure agreements. And what HP, which by the way, there's a small summary I've noticed in the October 2012 newsletter, Helen Holder talking about the use of challenges in dealing with the supply chain on toxicology, but a nice little overview of their use of the GreenScreen. What they do find is that the formulators are very engaged and they're actively performing GreenScreens, and they like it because you're giving them very clear criteria. So you're seeing this innovation within the supply chain, which we find really interesting. Ongoing, HP will continue to use GreenScreen to expand into other material sectors, other material uses within HP's own procurement, but they're also helping to integrate GreenScreen within the electronic sector generally. We know other IT companies are using it, and in fact have hired toxicologists to help put more of a focus on hazard assessment of chemicals. And this is a quote from one of the suppliers to HP, Jonathan Plisco from Poly1. I read this and I thought, well, that's not really mind-breaking, but obviously it was an aha moment for a formulator. So it's good to remember we can't assume everyone is on the same page. The more you know about what you are putting into your products, the more likely you are to make better choices in product development. My last two slides, I put these in at the last minute yesterday because there was a lot of talk about alternatives assessment, and I just wanted to point you to the Commons Alternatives Assessment Principles, which were formulated this year, but they did have their foundation in the Lowell Center for Sustainable Production, the Toxic Use Reduction Institute, Environmental Defense Fund, and our own BizNGO working group to lay basic principles around alternatives assessment thinking. You can find it on our website, on TURI's website, but basically the principles are, number one, reduce hazard. You'd reduce risk easily when you reduce hazard, particularly when exposures are equal or the same. Minimize exposure. Obviously, with any alternatives, you need to know product function, how people will be exposed. Use best available information. This is often a challenge with data gaps. you need to then really work with your supply chain to get more disclosure and transparency. Common thing I'm seeing being picked up here in these discussions. Particularly, any kind of alternatives, you need to know the assumptions that were made. Resolving trade-offs, you need to know the whole product life cycle to better understand. Stephanie was talking about product uninformed consequences and the challenges that everyone faces in the product life cycle trade-offs. But take action. You do need, I mean, our whole modus operandi is to move off of inherently hazardous materials to safer alternatives through informed substitution and more information. And with that, I think I'm on time. Thank you very much. If you want more information, please go to the GreenScreen on our website. As I said, chemsex and sinless.org, great information. I encourage you to try out the database. And thank you very much. I look forward to more discussions.
Oh, here we go. That's all right. Great. So our next speaker actually asked a number of really good questions yesterday, so I have a high expectation now. So Liz Harriman is the Deputy Director of the Toxic Use Reduction Institute at the University of Massachusetts in Lowell. She's responsible for managing the operations and research functions of the Institute. But in her 14 years sort of getting this experience, she has provided lots of technical research and support to Massachusetts companies with the goal of identifying safer alternatives to toxic chemicals used in manufacturing and production.